think that our clients who come to us with the tremendous amounts of anxiety are only doing what they can do to survive the experience. But one of the main things that anxiety tells them to do is to avoid anything that could be an anxiety trigger for them.
Yeah.
And it seems sort of understandable. It seems like that's the only thing a person can do when they feel so anxious is avoid. That seems logical. And yet it's really a trap.
Yeah. Even I'm just thinking, for some of you, you may not realize that your client who's napping throughout the day, sleeping is avoidance. Not participating in things is avoidance. So there's just so much of it.
I know.
So that when you're meeting with your clients, I just want you to be getting to cue in. It's like, oh my gosh, my client really is avoiding. Yeah, I think that must be just a natural protective approach, right? But the reason it isn't helpful is that the only thing it does is it serves to tell the amygdala that you cannot handle the experience that's going on and the amygdala's message to you that this is dangerous, when it's actually just uncomfortable, right? But when you avoid, what you're saying to the amygdala is, maybe something dangerous is going on and I can't handle it.
Right. And what happens then? Then we've learned I can't handle it, and we learned I just have to avoid, and we keep having our life become smaller and smaller because anxiety is a mean bully, and that's what it does. It just takes more and more away from us.
Yeah.
And I think recognizing that avoidance is such a trap, it feels so good in the moment though.
Yeah.
And I always say to my clients, like, I can understand why you're doing that, because it feels so good in that moment to just avoid the situation, whatever that difficulty is. Think about that client you were using a few minutes ago in an example, the one who had the fear of driving. Mm-hmm. And what would be the natural thing for her to do is just to avoid driving.
Yeah.
And we don't feel ready to do something because we would like to avoid for as long as we can, because that's what anxiety is telling us to do. But can we get better that way? I mean, what I say to my clients is, like, if this worked, you wouldn't be here.
Yeah, and I think this is a nice place to really do some motivational interviewing or values work with them, right? Because it's like, what would you, if you didn't have anxiety, what would you be doing in the afternoon other than laying in your bed or playing video games or whatever that looks like? And this particular girl that I talked about in the other video, she was a very social person. She had many, many friends who had really kind of left her life to go off to college because she didn't. She just stayed at home. And so she began to share with me the kind of life she had pictured herself having, and how, since her anxiety disorder, how her life had gotten very, very small. Right. And so, she got to the place where she understood the only way she was going to get that life back was to work on doing the opposite of avoiding. I often talk to my clients about meerkats at the zoo. And so if you watch them, they're always looking for danger. They're up on their haunches and they're looking for danger. And then, if you're at the zoo and you tap on the window or something, and one of them, hears the tap and they let out whatever little sound they let out, and then you see them and they're scurrying into the sand. Literally, their amygdalas told them so automatically and instinctually to bury themselves, right? So this goes way back to protect ourselves. But I want to make sure that all of you know that when we're working with anxiety and OCD, there is nothing going on in the here and now that's actually dangerous. Right. If you're talking about someone who, there's something going on there's actually a fire happening, we want their amygdala to scream at them. Right. We want them to run away from a burning building. But for our clients with anxiety disorders and OCD, they are aware that this is kind of crazy behavior, but they can't seem to stop it because they just automatically listen to their brain that tells them to hide.
Right, exactly. If I'm afraid of spiders, that just means I can't be around spiders anywhere in any situation. And any kind of fear can have an amazing way with anxiety to kind of spread, and so you have to avoid all kinds of things. I think about a guy that I worked with years ago who had terrible fear of spiders, and he didn't walk out the front door of his house. He had a whole excuse with his family because he didn't tell them why, because he must have known in some way that didn't really make sense. But the issue was that his front door had big shrubbery on either side of it, and he imagined that there were spiders in the shrubbery, and so he would not walk out the front door of his house. It was a very awkward thing that he had to do with his house layout to not use the front door. Wow. But he just would not use the front door because of the possibility of spiders. And that's the kind of thing, again, that avoidance can just spiral and bring in other things that for the others of us sort of looking in on it, it doesn't even feel related.
Yeah. And as you're telling that story, I'm thinking some of you who are listening might be saying, yeah, but there might be spiders in that shrub, right?
There might.
It makes sense that they would avoid shrubs that have spiders in them. And so that's that work that we have to do when we're bringing someone out of avoidance. We're having to have them get curious as to, okay, this is kind of interesting that I'm responding as though something is dangerous. Because even if there were a spider in the shrub, right, is that actually dangerous, or is that just uncomfortable to see a spider? And our big over response of avoiding going out the front door in case there might be a spider really begins to not make a lot of sense. So it isn't the fact of, maybe there's a spider, there might be a spider. And that's the other thing I want to make sure that we tell everyone is, just because people do this work doesn't mean that they won't walk out the front door and there'll be a spider there, right? That's very possible. But remember, having a spider be on a shrub as you walk out the front door, that isn't a dangerous thing.
No.
So as we're getting our clients to stop avoiding and start leaning into the places that they have discomfort and fear, it's really important for them to get really clear with themselves. Is something actually dangerous going on, or is this just something that I'm uncomfortable with?
And back to what you talked about in the other video with thinking about 100 people. How would 100 people react to this? We cannot, as therapists, debate whether there might be a spider in those shrubs. That is a losing proposition to do.
Yeah.
But if a client can begin to think about how would 100 other people respond to this? Because what you really start to see is of course, there's going to be a huge range in 100 people. You got people who won't be afraid at all and people who are terrified, but where will the majority of them be? And people begin to have a perspective on, oh yeah, I can see that I'm kind of out of line with that. I have to give one final little funny story because it just occurred to me. I have a client who's been very afraid of spiders, and she came in. She's done all kinds of great work with spiders, but Kimberly, there is a moment sometimes when clients will have things unpredictable pop up. And she had an unpredictable spider experience.
It happens all the time, actually.
But yeah, right? Because you and I wouldn't even think about those things, but because she's been, think about spiders. But she said she got ready for bed last week, and as she was getting ready for bed, a spider ran across her comforter, but right before she got into bed. And she said she paused, and she looked it was gone. She said, okay. And she got into bed, and she went to sleep. And I was like,
wow.
Whoa, right?
That gets a high five.
Yeah. And think about that in the past, what that would have been, and what kind of disruption that would have been in her life. Mm-hmm. But because of all the work that she's done on dealing with her fear of spiders, she was able to have that kind of a reaction to it. So we see these kind of successes every day.
Yeah, and the other quick thing I want to say about that is you really need to remind your clients that avoidance provides temporary relief, right? But it really grows their anxiety. It grows their distress.
Yeah.
It prevents them from doing things that they love. So, they're going to make a good case for avoidance, and you're going to have to be prepared to help them see. I always say to my clients, but what's the other half of the story?
Yeah.
Okay? And then get really detailed about what does all this avoidance take away from you or prevent you from
What's
doing.
the cost?
Yeah.
What is the cost?
Yeah.